is Thomas, if you don't know who I am. Hopefully, I think I'm beginning to be familiar with a lot of your faces, but I'm also aware that we're getting toward the winter time, and so we're expecting to see some returning friends that we haven't seen through the summer months. And so if you are just recently back, welcome back to Orange City. It's good to see you again. And so I am currently the student pastor working here. I am attending seminary with intent to become an elder in the United Methodist Church to lead my own congregation one day. I am filling in for Pastor Janet this morning. She has been away at a conference this week working with missions and Zoe ministry, which is something that our church is very involved in. She, I believe, is actually on a plane back right now, I think. And if she's not on a plane, then she's waiting for a plane, which could take her anywhere from half an hour to 7 hours, as we are all familiar with. And so let's talk about the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke this morning is full of healings. If you read the Gospel of Luke, you will be bombarded with healings. You will read, and Jesus heals someone, and Jesus heals someone, and Jesus heals someone, and then he says a couple of things, and then he heals someone, and he heals someone, and he heals someone else. This is how the Gospel of Luke basically runs the entire time. This story in particular is one of two in this Gospel where Jesus specifically heals someone afflicted with skin disease. We're probably all familiar with the other one in chapter 17, much later, where Jesus heals 10 lepers, as what we commonly hear it referred to as. Now, what's translated lepers there is not strictly leprosy as we medically define it nowadays, and it's better maybe to just call it skin disease, and that's part of the reason why we use this translation this morning. Leprosy is not necessarily the same disease as what these people have. It's just a skin disease. And we're familiar with the story. The 10 are all healed. They go off, but one returns to Jesus and falls on his face and worships. And this is a Samaritan who does this, a foreigner, someone who doesn't belong in this society. And I mention that these are two different stories because it's important for us to realize that they are two different stories. We shouldn't confuse the two of them. Each story reveals to us different things about God and us. Now, this story in chapter 5 begins a little curiously. This sick man is described as being in town. And now in Leviticus, before this morning reading, we read from chapter 14. And if you back up the chapter before that, chapter 13, that is what to do with a skin disease that has just appeared. Chapter 14 is what to do with a skin disease that has just healed. And so in chapter 13, there's all these regulations about how to basically diagnose this skin disease. And it summarizes the life of the infected person like this. This is verses 45 and 46, I think. 46 and 47. It says, "As for the diseased person who has the infection, his clothes must be torn. The hair on his head must be unbound. He must cover his mustache, and he must call out, 'Unclean! Unclean!' The whole time he has the infection, he will be continually unclean. He must live in isolation, and his place of residence must be outside the camp." This man, then, in chapter 5 of Luke, is in flagrant defiance of this law. It seems likely his infection is visible to the naked eye, perhaps obvious even, for Luke mentions the extent of his condition. He is covered with this skin disease. Has this man been calling out, "Unclean! Unclean!" as he walks through the town to find Jesus? Imagine his humiliation. Furthermore, if this is his hometown, which it does not have to be, he likely knows everyone he is encountering in his brash search for Jesus. Now, we should pause briefly here to talk about the idea of clean and unclean, since it is important to this passage and Luke and fundamental to the book of Leviticus as a whole. You cannot understand these without understanding clean and unclean. Now, there is nothing wrong, sinful, or embarrassing about being unclean. It is just a state of being, just like being clean. Common things can be clean or unclean, and commonly a person would alternate between these states. The major difference between them is that what is common and unclean cannot be sanctified to become holy. You must first be clean before you can be made holy. And in practice, what this means is the holiness of God's presence would eradicate, would destroy anything that was unclean. And therefore, if you were unclean, you could not worship God in the tabernacle or in the temple at the risk of your own life. Now, it's worth noting, in Jesus' time, the Pharisees believed that the Messiah would come only if all of Israel was clean. Anyone unclean was actively preventing the Messiah from coming. And so there were people in Israel who blamed this man and other people like him for things that they were not responsible for. Now, there is something unique about this man's situation with a skin disease. This type of uncleanness is not shed easily. Most cases of being unclean are temporary. A bath at the end of the day is enough to make someone clean again, most of the time. His uncleanness was ongoing. Thus, when he approaches Jesus, he does not ask to be healed. Instead, he asks to be made clean. Did you catch that? His concern is not his sickness. His concern is his state before God. In response, Christ touches this man. And this too is surprising. Leviticus says that even touching something which is unclean makes the one who touched unclean themselves. Now, we should not belabor this point too much. Jesus' willingness to become unclean on account of this person should not be too surprising if being temporary unclean is not that big of a deal. What is surprising is somehow through this touch and these words, Jesus cleanses the man. This is not how things work. Now, I considered this action a couple of different ways. Is Christ so pure that in touching this man, his cleanness spreads and purifies this man too? Or does Jesus touch and give his cleanness to the man and take the uncleanness from the man? I've prepared a helpful visual aid to visualize what may be going on here. And you can see my amazing artistry up here. I am a very gifted artist, just like my sister. You can tell from my cartoon hands. The top one would be Jesus. The bottom one is the unclean man. And I'm thinking either Jesus purifies him, as in the top, or he trades, he exchanges his cleanness for the uncleanness. Now, in my estimation, this counts as overanalyzing